So, well, let's just jump in. It's the inaugural video stream. The video. We're streaming video on X, and X seems to be pretty flexible with the speech and how much they tolerate free speech. It's better than YouTube. Not better than Rumble, but I don't think the Rumble audience is prepared. I've only done my spaces on Twitter or X. So the audience, it would be a new audience. I don't know if they'd be prepared for the books. So you guys, you're already immersed. You're already inoculated to the book stream. So I know you guys have the attention span for books. So the Rumble audience, I've seen the live chat. I've seen Nick's live chat. They're not sending their best. Okay, let's just say that. It's the boomers on Rumble. So anyways, we've got a more intelligent audience on X waiting for me to get started. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to bring the music down a little bit just because in the replay I don't want it to be booming over me reading. I just want it to be slight ambience. Also, I get bored just reading. So anyways, chapter 15, Sources of Power. The power of rational analysis and the problem of hyperrationality. Let me just pop this open real quick. Okay. Hyperrationality is a mental disturbance in which the victim attempts to handle all decisions and problems on a purely rational basis, relying on only logical and analytical forms of reasoning. In the initial states, this condition can be mistaken for a healthy development of critical thinking. Only later do we observe an unwillingness to act without a sound, empirically or logically supported basis. The final stages degenerate into paralysis by analysis. This is the Ben Shapiro's and the destinies of the world. Hung up on every little detail, hung up on every little analysis. When the truth is usually just right in front of you, you just have to either read between the lines or use your own experience. It's so funny, he talked about the Bayesian analysis, and he's the only one who doesn't use it. What a nerd, what a freak. Anyways, to understand the affliction of hyperrationality, other diseases can serve as analogs. Consider two different kinds of diseases that can affect vision. One is macular degeneration, in which the fovea and central zone of the retina is destroyed. The fovea is the center of the retina, packed with cone cells, and is the only part of the eye capable of fine discrimination. When we examine something carefully, we aim our foveas at it. I used to believe this would be about the worst visual impairment I could imagine, short of blindness. Every time you tried to see something, you would center it in your visual field, and it would disappear. The second visual disease is retinitis pigmentosa. Pigmentosa? Yeah. In which the peripheral vision deteriorates. This never seemed as devastating to me as a macular degeneration. Who needs peripheral vision anyway? I was wrong. Retinitis pigmentosa is the more disorienting condition. To understand why, hold out your arm in front of you as far as it will go, and raise your thumb as if you were hitchhiking. Look at the thumbnail. The area of your thumbnail is the total part of the visual field captured by the fovea. All of the rest belongs to peripheral vision. If you lost all of your peripheral vision, you would have this tiny searchlight sweeping endlessly back and forth, trying to locate everything and retain orientation. Without peripheral vision, you would even have trouble sitting quietly and reading, since you need peripheral vision to direct your eye movements. Yeah, there's this thing called chunking that we do when we read. You are not just carefully reading the word in front of you, like looking at each letter and sounding it out. That's what children do when they're learning to read. What advanced readers do is they're reading by looking at these three words, or maybe even if you're chunking better and better, these words. When you're just reading have, you're also reading these. You're reading around. You're using the context of the following and preceding words to give you better prediction of what the word you're about to read is and give you better meaning around it. And people who are better readers can chunk better. They can read whole sentences and gather the meaning without having to drill down into one word. And chunking helps you read faster. Chunking helps you, and by reading faster, you can retain more at a faster speed. So even though you're reading faster, you may retain the same amount. So you can finish entire pages while someone's still on the first paragraph. And that all involves peripheral vision. And this is something you can train on. I think Wendell's talked about this, the sculpture tables. Let me look it up. It's going to bother me if I don't look it up, so let me just look it up. Let me get a new window here. And we'll pop it up on the screen. Let me see if I'm going to be able to get Google up. Let's see. Why does it always want to put me on English United Kingdom? That's so annoying. Okay, here we go. Switch to display capture. Okay, so we're going to search for, I think it's reading, chunking, tables. I'll figure it out. I promise I will figure this out. Stoller tables? No. I'm telling you, it has a K in there somewhere. Reading. Maybe I need the word like training or practice. Word chunking tables. Reading practice. Chunking method. Okay, well this is close. I'm going to pop this open. Word chunk activities. This might be what I'm looking for. Man, these Google pop-ups are so annoying. It's unbelievable. It's really bothering me that I can't figure out this table name. Google's has been going down the drain. I used to be able to search things that were like very far off from what I was actually trying to read. Let me look up Bing. Maybe Bing will help me. And if Bing doesn't help, I'm going to use ChatGPT. No. I can't remember what this is called. Alright, ChatGPT. You're going to help me out. Really? Alright, this Claude AI might get me around this. I'm going to pop this out. See if this... Because this is going to bother me if I can't figure this out. Of course. Okay. Let's see what happens. What are the tables used to help increase chunking in reading? Chunking and speed when reading. It starts with S. No, it's not gonna help. All right. I'm about to give up. I can't manage to find what this is called. Yeah, I'm just getting like stuff that's related to what I do, which is software development. I can't get anything to come up with a Schulter tables? Schulte tables? Did I find it? Yo, I finally got it. All right. It only took me 100 times. Okay. This helps you with your chunking ability. This helps you increase your peripheral awareness. So what you have to do is you're supposed to click these numbers in order as fast as you can. So I'll show my screen again. So you have a table of numbers, and this whole site is completely customizable. You can change the grid size, pretty much everything. Turn numbers and spin numbers. It's crazy. I was testing with the flashlight mode, but that completely ruins the point of what I'm trying to talk about. This is important. So what you're supposed to be able to do is stare at this dot in the middle, and the better you are with your peripheral vision at reading the number that's supposed to come next, you should be able to do this test faster. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You can see my mouse is moving all over because I have to move my eyes. But if you're really good, you shouldn't have to move your eyes at all. You should just be able to stare at the middle dot. Did I get 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. And the faster you can do this, the better you are going to be at reading. And I don't know if they have Schulte tables for words. I know they do it for numbers, but this is a good test that Wendell showed me for improving your peripheral vision. So let's go back to the window. Okay, so without peripheral vision, you would even have trouble sitting quietly and reading, since you need peripheral vision to direct your eye movements. Yeah, and you also need peripheral vision to chunk your words so that you can have context about what you're reading. Hyperrationality is like retinitis pigmentosa, in which we try to do all of our thinking with just one of our sources of power, the ability to apply rational procedures. In this chapter, I examine hyperrationality, but I will not fall into the right brain, left brain, holistic versus linear diatribe. That line usually means the author has dramatically made contact with the right brain and is preaching its virtues while mocking the poor left brain folks. That's not going to get us anywhere. Besides, this book would never have been written without analyses and even some logical thought. Kenneth Teenan, the British essayist, producer, and playwright, describes some advice he had been given. Never take the anti-intellectual side in an argument. You'll find that most of the people who applaud you will be the people you hate. Rational analysis is a cornerstone of intellectual activities and a very important source of power. We don't want anyone to encourage people to make ill-informed, impulsive decisions. This chapter compares the experiential sources of power that have been the topic of this book with analytical sources of power. Our ability to use intuition and pattern matching is based on experience. Our ability to use mental simulation depends on having the knowledge and experience to set up the mental simulations. In contrast, our ability to analyze situations requires rational thought that is independent of experience. Statisticians, logicians, and decision analysts can provide guidance no matter what the domain. The role of rational analysis. Rational analysis is a specialized and powerful source of power that may play a limited role in many tasks, a dominant role in a few tasks, and sometimes no role at all. Rational thinking is like foveal vision using cone cells, which provides us with the ability to make fine discriminations, but is not sufficient to maintain orientation and is irrelevant during nighttime. Analysis lets us make fine discriminations between ideas and calculations that let us find trends in noisy data. So this is like the System 2 thought that Kahneman has talked about. So we'll probably get into that. We'll probably talk about him at some point in this chapter. We need peripheral vision to detect where to apply the analyses and calculations. Rational analysis reduces the chance that an important option will be overlooked. It supports the broad search for many options, rather than deep searches of only a few options. It comes closer to error-free decision-making than other sources of power, and it allows the decision-maker to use declarative knowledge. Without rational analysis, we would not have the exciting growth of science and technology, the miracles of medicine, and so forth. Decision trees and cost-benefit analyses can help us make sense out of complicated choices, but there are some limitations to rational analysis, and that seems to make some people nervous. If analysis is a source of power, it will have to have some limitations and boundary conditions. The nature of rational thinking. Rational comes from the Latin root ratio, which means to reckon. To think by reckoning or calculating, we need to do the following things. Decompose. We have to analyze a task. Break the task, idea, or argument into small units, basic elements, so we can perform different calculations on them. Seeing how to break something into its components is a source of power in its own right. So being able to decompose. One of the things that engineers and maybe even people who are just tradesmen, the thing they always talk about is how they learned or how they found out they were interested in these things in the first place. A lot of mechanics are like, I learned how to, repair cars by taking them apart and putting them back together. That's decomposition. It's reducing something to its parts. And usually when you decompose something, you learn about how those parts are connected, the relationship between those parts. Decontextualize. Since context adds ambiguity, we must try to find units that are independent of context. We want to represent the important parts of context as additional facts and rules and elements. To accomplish this, we try to find a formal way to represent the world, to treat it as a representation, a picture, a model. We try to build theories and maps to substitute for having a sense of the task or the equipment. We must calculate. We apply a range of formal procedures on the elements, such as deductive rules of logic and statistical analyses. And we describe. All the analyses and representations should be open to public scrutiny. Following this agenda often leads to significant accomplishments, particularly in the areas of science and technology. Rational thinking is an important source of power. It provides the benefits of orderly and systematic approaches to complex problems. For a task such as running a complex piece of equipment, that was weird, there was a blank page, perhaps a nuclear power plant, we want the operators to have a theory or mental model of the layout of the plant. We want them to be able to decompose problems to perform troubleshooting when they detect signs of malfunctions. We want them to collect objective data that can be described and checked by others. The goal of making the thinking explicit means that a community can arrive at a common perspective and that teams can be set up to work separately on different parts of a problem, with some confidence that their work will fit together at the end. The limits of rational thinking. Lack of basic elements. To perform an analysis means decomposing a situation or problem into its constituents. However, there are not any primitives that naturally exist. The components defined are arbitrary and depend on individual goals and methods of calculation. This is where the what did they call it? The decontextualizers, the people who break everything down, the deconstructionists. What they do is they tell you that all boundaries are arbitrary. All boundaries are defined by society. And that's kind of a tautology, like obviously. Those boundaries didn't exist until we gave language to them, which is also arbitrary and defined by society. So they're expressing in an arbitrary and societal defined, like this, it was made by people, and people are obviously fallen. They are using a continuously evolving and what would you call it? It would be a messy, it would be a fuzzy language. It's not completely precise. It's ever changing, ever evolving. They're using this fuzzy thing that's already lacking in granularity and coarseness to describe things that are also arbitrary and fuzzy and ill-defined, defined by people. So yes, the concepts, the components that we use to create boundaries in the world, to define things, to give names to things, to give names to processes and phenomenon that we can examine and explore and engage with, that we can break down into reproducible phenomenon. These things that we give names to are completely contextual based on the society that they're in. So when these deconstructionists tell you that, yeah, of course, the boundaries that we create for them are arbitrary. Well, the language you're using to describe those things is arbitrary as well. Everything is arbitrary if you really want to get down to it. If you want to deconstruct everything, that is absolutely possible. But the point of that, what is the point of that? The ought that these people come up with, I don't think they really think it through, because the ought is also arbitrary. The reason they're deconstructing everything is arbitrary and defined by a society. They're using a language to describe the way they're deconstructing things, but isn't that language completely arbitrary? Isn't the reason they're doing that completely arbitrary? That's up to them. They were the ones that defined that goal. They're the ones that have that value. They're inhabited by the idea of deconstructing things as a tool. But we have to be careful. This is a limit of rational thinking. We can't deconstruct forever. You can try, and there is utility in deconstruction, but if that's the only goal, if the goal is to deconstruct until there's nothing left, well, that's what you get, nothing left. There is nothing. You've removed society, you've removed context. You've completely annihilated the meaning of the things that you created in the first place. You've stripped the world of meaning, essentially. So we have to be careful. The components defined are arbitrary and depend on individual goals and methods of calculation. Well, of course. So we have to be aware of the context. The basic elements that we're talking about exist in a context. They have a history. They are arbitrary, but something led up to that point. We can't just deconstruct away everything. We can't just toss it all out. The basic elements of a fire are different to a firefighter and an insurance claims adjuster and an arson investigator. Logical atomism, the belief that ideas and concepts can be decomposed into their natural elements, was popular among philosophers in the 1920s and 1930s. Interesting time for that to happen, huh? I wonder what happened right after this. I wonder what kind of leaders, what kind of world was shaped by these ideas. I wonder what kind of societies were produced and what kind of reaction happened to the societies like this, to ideas like this. And when we talk about ideas, don't forget, we always say, ideas are people. And that's not by accident. It has since been abandoned in philosophy and in psychology. Atomistic schemes have usually proved arbitrary and unworkable. Yeah, isn't that interesting? Yes, the components we define are arbitrary, but why deconstruct them? That's also proved to be arbitrary. The ought, the want to deconstruct everything is also arbitrary. You have to remember that. In psychology, we usually cannot reduce natural situations to a reliable and valid set of symbolic units that can be treated with logical operators. There is no right way to break down a task. Different people find different schemes. Even the same person might choose different schemes depending on the goals being pursued. And if we try to predefine the basic elements, we must either work with an artificial or narrow task, or run the risk of distorting the situation to make it fit into the so-called basic elements. Yeah, you get overfitting. That's a problem with AI, actually. When you change your filters, when you change the pattern recognition software or patterns, the pattern recognition filters, essentially, to be too few or too many. That's a huge problem. A system has to have constraints. Alternatively, we can accept the importance of experience in seeking useful ways to decompose a task within a task. Most of the time, we blend the analytical and experiential sources of power to get things done. Few of us fall into the trap of hyperrationality. Yeah, it's not productive. Ambiguous rules. Rules and procedures take some sort of the if-then form. They often sound simple, but the hard part is figuring out if the antecedent condition, I just want to make sure I say that correctly, the if part of the rule has been met. That is why researchers prefer to work on rational inference using context-free artificial problems that leave no ambiguity. Outside of the laboratory, we find it difficult to pin down the context so that people can agree that the antecedent conditions were met and expect that the rule will be carried out. In example 13.1, concerning the Goeben, Churchill gave an order that was essentially a rule. If you are faced with a superior force, then do not fight it. Can we say that Admiral Trowbridge violated the rule? The context of the situation, the ambiguities make it harder to judge whether the Goeben constituted, I had trouble reading that, a superior force to Trowbridge's 12 ships. Most people are sensitive to how much judgment and interpretation are needed to carry out a rule or an order. We rarely try to plan out every contingency. Instead, we try to make it easy to understand the intent behind the rule or order. Difficulty of setting up the calculations. Even when we know which rules apply and which to perform, we still have to initialize the equations or arguments. It is usually difficult to make the estimates called for by calculational methods, when the calculations require people to estimate probabilities or utilities, or to estimate their values, or to make other unnatural judgments. We are going to have trouble. That was like 90% of the last book we read, was people setting up and estimating these probabilities or utilities, estimated value theorems, estimated utility theory, stuff like that. All of these things created so many problems for people because we are not naturally logical. We are not naturally rational. It's something that we have to call upon. It's a faculty that exerts, or that we have to exert energy into. We have to exert ourselves to think rationally, to think with to perform calculations and think in numbers and fractions and ratios and if-then statements. Those are all logical things which are very difficult for humans to do. It requires extreme exertion. We deplete all of our glucose quickly when we're thinking like that. The exponential sources of power do not appear to be helpful in generating the estimates that would be used in analyses. Yeah, we must use rules and steps and guides to keep us on track when we're doing these kinds of calculations. Experience is not the only thing that can help us. And it seems to play no part. Because it's all System 1. System 1 is dumb with... it doesn't perform these calculations, so it doesn't matter how much experience we have. Our instinct does not involve calculation. Calculating things is too slow. That's not what that system is for. Combinatorial explosions. Formal methods of rational analysis can run into difficulties when they consider a large set of factors, as in found in a natural setting, and try to work out the implications of all the different permutations. As you add more knowledge, the job of searching through the connections will increase exponentially. The problem with inferences, say Schenck and Owens in 1987, is that there are too many of them to make. If, for example, we can make 5 inferences from a fact, and 5 more inferences from each of those inferences and so forth, then the combinatorial complexity of trying to investigate inference chains of any length greater than a few steps becomes totally overwhelming. Processing power is not infinite, either in people or in machines. In our everyday lives, we do not face combinatorial explosions because we are not relying on calculations. We use exponential sources of power to frame situations and arrive at manageable representations. Then, if necessary, we bring in the analytical methods to add precision. The analytical methods run into limits when we try to use them without recourse to the exponential sources of power. The problem is not rationality, but hyperrationality. The hobgoblin. Okay. Not sure what to think about this. Not sure what to anticipate here. I don't know what's coming up next. I have always been a fan of consistency. One of my pleasures is detecting inconsistencies in the actions and ideas of other people. My wife has learned to be tolerant when I triumphantly find yet another example of her inconsistencies. She recites the phrase, "A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds," and turns to more important matters. We all know that consistency is important because of all the errors that can be traced to inconsistencies. For example, your friend needs to use your car, so you pick the friend up, switch places, get driven to your home and dropped off. You wave goodbye, walk up to your door, and realize that your house key is on the keychain in your car ignition. In one part of your brain, you knew you needed the keychain to get into your house. In another place, maybe just a few neurons away, you knew you had to leave the keychain with your friend. Somehow, the two ideas never got connected. If we can detect and eliminate inconsistencies, we can eliminate the errors caused by inconsistencies. Rational analysis is appealing because it is a strategy for reducing or eliminating inconsistencies. We can try to decompose complex tasks, plans, or beliefs into smaller elements to find any inconsistency. Unhappily, several philosophers have recently questioned our ability to detect inconsistencies reliably. Cherniak in 1981, Harman in 1973, and 1986, Stitch in 1990. Cherniak in 1981 showed that we cannot just use a truth table method to make sure our beliefs are consistent. Suppose that each line of the truth table for the conjunctions of all beliefs could be checked in the time a light ray takes to traverse the diameter of a proton, an appropriate supercycle time, and suppose that the computer was permitted to run for 20 billion years. The estimated time from the Big Bang dawn of the universe to the present. A belief system containing only 138 logically independent propositions would overwhelm the time resources of this super machine. There's too much complexity. There's too many permutations. That's why your password goes from a weak password with 8 characters to an uncrackable, unsolvable password with 32 characters. It's only 24 more characters, but like one of them is inconceivably more difficult in the amount of characters that you could possibly use. So using uppercase characters, numbers, special characters, that increases the complexity, the permutations. It makes it so that computers have to do more work and traverse more possible permutations to solve for your password when they're trying to crack it, when they're trying to guess it. That's why Bitcoin uses so much electricity. It's not because the problems get harder, it's because it has to traverse more possible problems, more possible, what would you call it, hashes, I guess, if you want to be technical about it. Let me take a sip of water here. In view of this, we cannot expect anyone to maintain a perfectly consistent set of beliefs. It's easy to trace an error backward and find an inconsistency, but that takes advantage of hindsight. We cannot root out the inconsistencies in advance. Harman examined a type of inconsistency where we continue to hold a belief even when we no longer accept the evidence on which it was based. To stamp out this type of inconsistency, we would have to classify, code, and store in memory all of the evidence on which every belief is based. And as we know, we don't do that. I'm going to increase the font size. See if this helps you guys. Maybe you're on mobile. I just realized you guys might be on mobile. I'm trying to read this. Let me get rid of this ad too. Okay. Cherniak has presented another type of inconsistency, which he calls memory compartmentalization. Here, a person holds inconsistent beliefs, but does not make the connection because the beliefs are stored in different contexts in memory. Cherniak gives these 2 examples. First, at least a decade before Fleming's discovery of penicillin, many microbiologists were aware that molds cause clear spots in bacteria cultures, and they knew that such a bare spot indicates no bacterial growth. Yet, they did not consider the possibility that molds release an antibacterial agent. The other is that Smith believes an open flame can ignite gasoline, and Smith believes the match he now holds has an open flame. And Smith is not suicidal. Yet, Smith decides to see whether a gas tank is empty by looking inside while holding the match nearby for illumination. Yeah, we've all done stupid stuff like that. If you've ever held a glass of milk in your hand, or any kind of drink, just think of like a cup, regular old cup, and you see something on the ground, maybe you drop your keys, and you bend down to pick up the keys, and you spill the drink. You know you have a drink in your hand, and you know bending over to pick up the keys, you probably should put the drink down, but you're thinking about the keys. The context is you just dropped the keys. You completely forgot about the other context where you're holding a glass of liquid and you spill your drink everywhere. How many times I've been in a busy Starbucks where I've you drop a straw or something, or you try and throw something in the trash can and you miss, and you got your drink in your hand and you're like, whoa, I almost just dumped that drink everywhere. I almost just wore my drink instead of, sipped it down. But it's all about the context. It's about the frame of mind you're in. If the most important priority on your mind shifts the context to, I just dropped my keys, especially the more important, the more severely, the more aware you are of the issue. I would think that someone holding a drink in their hand and dropping their keys near the spot between the floor of an elevator and the floor of a building, if you drop your keys near that, you're going to drop your drink more likely, or be more likely to drop your drink than if you just drop your keys, in your house or something. Same thing if you have a baby in your hand. If the baby's slipping out of your arms, he's wiggling around, and you got a drink in your hand, you're going to be more likely to be worried about the baby. The context, your awareness, your perception is going to be focused on the baby, not the drink. The drink is secondary. You can get a new drink, you can't get a new baby. So you're very preoccupied. Almost your entire consciousness is focused on the baby. It demands all of your attention. So, yes. Compartmentalization. Different contexts in memory. And don't forget, we have two different types of memory. We have short-term memory and long-term memory. So compartmentalization probably works on both of those. And it probably works between those. It's probably very difficult to move something between short-term memory and long-term memory. There's a natural compartmentalization there. How hard is it to remember a phone number longer than, 20 seconds, 30 seconds? How hard is it to learn a language beyond a few words? Anyways, the Fleming story does not seem like an instance of inconsistency, and the Smith story does. However, both show the same pattern, an inconsistency between the set of beliefs held and the actions taken. Once we see the error or the missed opportunity, we can trace it back to the beliefs that did not get connected. It is too much to expect that every piece of information in memory be continually matched against every other piece to catch these connections and draw their implications. It would take exhaustive memory search to find the interesting connections. We can feel proud we do discover them, but if the pieces belong to different memory compartments, we cannot expect high levels of success. These examples indicate that it is impossible to free ourselves from inconsistency, belief perseverance, and memory compartmentalization. Actually, there is one way to ensure that people find inconsistencies and discover connections: by keeping the number of beliefs small. If we could struggle through life with only a few beliefs, perhaps fewer than 10, then we might have a chance to purge inconsistencies. That's quite a profound and bold statement. Having fewer beliefs leads to less inconsistencies, which makes life simpler and more consistent. Is that true? I think having a unified worldview is actually, it does make someone, I feel like that is logical. If you have a unified worldview or a unified world theory, a model of the world and how people act and why people have these interests and why people behave a certain way and why certain people believe certain things, why people get caught up in certain patterns of behavior and media patterns, why people like certain movies and why people read certain books, why young people like to drive fast. and why old people walk slow when they're walking down the street. Maybe there's one logical, consistent worldview, one world model, one model of the world that you can hold that makes all of those things make sense. And you don't have to hold a bunch of different belief systems, and you don't have to, constantly be searching your memory to match or find inconsistencies between the different models, the different compartmentalized models of the world. Having one model of the world satisfying the world is probably a very energy conserving thing. It probably makes you more efficient, makes you more consistent, makes you more robust and resilient to inconsistencies. You're probably able to detect them faster, and you're probably able to integrate them better if you have a very what's the word there? Holistic model of the world. There is worse news. Consistency may not be as helpful as we imagined. Jonathan Gruden, in 1989, has questioned the advice given to people who design computer interfaces to eliminate all inconsistencies. He wondered how good this advice was. In his home, he does not keep all his knives in one place. The knives used for eating go in one drawer. The putty knife he uses in his shop goes in a separate room. The set of large carving knives is kept in a wood block on the kitchen counter. The Swiss Army knife is with other camping gear. If he stored them together, he would have less trouble trying to find a knife, but many of them would be in inconvenient locations. Gruden is using consistency of function as his guiding principle. This takes more effort, judgment, and insight than consistency of feature. It is not sufficient to identify something as a knife. You have to understand how it will be used. If you settle for maintaining consistency of feature and expect that this strategy will keep everything well organized, you will be disappointed. The same problem arises for computer screens. Should a designer adopt only consistent procedures? Consider the rule that if you select an action from a menu, the computer should persevere in that mode. The last action selected strategy makes sense for some functions, such as picking a font style. Once I pick a style, the system retains that style until I change it. The last action selected rule also makes sense in searching for items. Once I enter a name in the query box and set the computer searching for it, I'm likely to want to continue through the document looking for other instances in which the name appears. The search function retains the name until I change it. The last action selected rule does not make sense for the cut and paste function. When I cut something, the most likely next act will be to paste it somewhere else. My computer anticipates this and makes it easy by switching modes automatically. The designers realized I would not be cutting one sentence or paragraph after another. The designers would not have done a good job if they insisted on a consistent principle, such as retaining a default option once someone selects it until it is changed. They had to understand how I was going to use the system and design around my needs. How? It's the how. It's the behavior. They had to preserve the consistency of function rather than consistency of feature. Therefore, we should be wary of efforts to ensure consistency at the level of features that do not consider the functions we are trying to perform. Rigor is not a substitute for imagination. Consistency is not a replacement for insight. I'm going to note this. Most of the time, we would rather have consistency than leave ourselves open to the problems created by inconsistency. It is a goal worth seeking, but, big but, attempts to ensure unrealistic levels of consistency are a symptom of hyperrationality. This is like purity spiraling. Our experience helps us anticipate the impacts of inconsistent beliefs and set the level of effort for reducing inconsistencies. So we can come to conclusions about, and through our experience, about how to reduce, resolve, and make ourselves conscious of inconsistent beliefs. So how much effort is needed to correct? How much effort is needed to find the inconsistencies, find the mismatches, find the discrepancies, and correct for them, and change our whole worldview. You're a very different person than you were in middle school, and likely even more different in elementary school. You're more different in elementary school than you are. Let me just rephrase that. You as a person now are more different than you were in elementary school. And you were much more different in elementary school than you were in high school. So you've made a lot more changes since primary school or elementary school. But how much should you change? That's a question that only experience can solve. So it's kind of like a paradox, being like a young person. It's like, how much do I change? How much of my personality and my behavioral patterns, how much of my psyche and my ego am I willing to sacrifice to improve or try to improve? Sometimes you don't even know if it's an improvement until you try it, because you don't have the experience. That's the paradox. You don't know how much of yourself to discard or destroy. It's destructive, actually. So it's like killing a part of yourself. A part of you has to die. There's a small ego death every time you change yourself, change your behaviors. A part of you literally has to die, fade away, and never be experienced again, or else you slip back into that old personality, and that's considered like relapsing or regression. It's like slipping. You're like falling backwards. So progress, how much do we progress? How much do we change? How much do we correct? Only experience can tell you. So the best way to learn that is to get more experience. The best way to change yourself is to start by changing yourself in little ways, and to find. And one thing that the earlier chapters in this book were talking about is that you can gain experience, or at least you can tell stories and gain experience from stories. You can learn about a context. You can learn about a certain situation. You won't know every variable in the situation. It's a story. There's like infinite amount of variables, an infinite amount of morals to the story that you can learn, but you can learn from experience through stories. You can use someone else's experience to help you, and you can kind of bootstrap yourself into knowing how much you should correct and how much you should discard, how much ego you should cut away, and how much you should change yourself. So if you want to avoid discarding too much, or you want to really try to change your whole life in a big way, to make massive and life-changing alterations to your ego, it's like maybe you should consult someone. Maybe you should ask someone to tell their story about them doing that, and see if it's for you. See if they have similar experience. See if it was a positive experience. See if it was worth it to them. And they may have different goals for doing it than you, so maybe you have to interrogate them about their goals too. Maybe you have to learn about that from them. And don't forget, your goals define your perception. So, and your perception defines your goals. Okay, we could keep going down this rabbit hole, but that was a good elicitation. This is certainly another noteworthy section there. Our experience helps us anticipate the impacts of inconsistent beliefs and set the level of effort for reducing inconsistencies. All right, W or L monologue chat. Let me know in the chat if that was a good rabbit hole to go down. Logic is indifferent to truth. The goal of logic is to root out inconsistent beliefs and generate new beliefs consistent with the original set. Logic does not consider whether our beliefs are true. Excuse me. A logical person can be wrong in everything she or he believes and still be consistent. Although we cannot always calculate inconsistencies, we are alert for them. We try to perceive inconsistencies in order to detect anomalies. The anomalies trigger our efforts to diagnose situations and initiate problem solving. This is like directly out of Klein's book. Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. This is like almost down to the sentence what we talked about in Thinking Fast and Slow. So we use our System 1 thinking, our experience, our intuition to catch the inconsistencies, and then we slow things down. We grind it to a halt. We really get out the pen and paper, and we get out our calculators so that we can do some problem solving, so we can get the logic tables out, the truth tables. We try and nail down the probabilities and see what our future holds based on the anomaly we just detected. Life is quite continuous. Life has you can tell stories, and stories are consistent. They're continuous. If someone's telling a good story, it flows. It has a beginning. It has, peaks and troughs. It has a flow in patterns. It's fractal. There's patterns in patterns. Usually characters relate to one another. It's not disjointed. A bad story is disjointed. A bad story is fragmented. A bad story only tells you parts and bits and pieces of what you need to know. So a good story tells you everything you need to know, and it contains multiple layers of truth. So problem solving, where was I going with this? Well, I sort of lost my train of thought, but the story is the continuous part that we are inhabiting. That's like life. Life is like a story. We can tell stories about life. That's the whole reason we're interested in other people. We're able to relate to other people through stories because they're continuous, because they're fractal, and because they have patterns that we can map onto our own patterns, our own stories. That's why we're so interested in them. That's all part of System 1, and we can use that to detect the anomalies in the stories. The holes where something doesn't match up, someone's leaving something out, someone said something that doesn't really jive, it jumps out at you. It's like, that shouldn't be part of the story. Why did you tell me that? Or something's missing here. Why aren't you telling me that? It feels like something's missing. It feels like you're leaving something out. Those are the asymptotes. Those are the parts of the story that are not continuous. They're inconsistent. They're anomalies. And we detect them, and then we slow them down. We start asking questions. We start getting more information. We start getting we open Obsidian and start piecing things together. We make a mind map. We make a Gantt chart. We figure out what's going on. We try and calculate the probability that something went wrong, that there was a disjointed inconsistency somewhere in the story. But anyways, the following example shows how finding an inconsistency helped someone to see. Let me just pop open Twitter real quick. Let's see. Alright, somehow there were 208 views on the stream so far. That's pretty good. I'll take it. Example 15.1. Okay, let's get into the example. The case of the missing contact lens. It is Saturday morning. I'm laying on the sofa reading a Simenon mystery novel about Inspector Maigret. Let me just see. This is why we're doing this on stream, so we can just do this. Hold on. It broke my screen real quick. Alright, let's see. Let's bring this over here. I'm getting better at using the stream overlays, but it's tough, man. It didn't open in an incognito window, so I gotta be careful what I click on. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, I've seen these. Jules Maigret is a fiction novel. Interesting. When was this stuff written? Okay, so the 30s to the 70s. I feel like I've seen this exact cover before. Probably have. I wonder if this is where the film noirs came from. Anyways. Someone in chat knows about that, probably. It's Saturday morning. I'm lying on the sofa reading a Simenon's mystery novel about Inspector Maigret, wandering the streets of Paris with him in search of yet another criminal, when my wife makes an unhappy discovery. One of her contact lenses is missing. Before I start crawling around on the floor, we go over the facts. We had guests for dinner the night before. She removed her contacts after they left. She was seated at the dining room table and carefully removed them over the tablecloth so she could find them easily if they popped out. She thinks something might have distracted her during this time. She put each into its own little cell, screwed the lids on, and carried the case to the bathroom. This morning, she picked up the contact lens case, opened up the compartment, and found that it was empty. She thinks it is possible that one of the lenses might have stuck to her finger as she attempted to deposit it in the case. This has never happened before, but it is something she worries about. We deduce that the missing lens could be in one of two places. Either it was transferred poorly last night and should be on the tablecloth or on the dining room floor, or it slipped out this morning and is somewhere in the bathroom. A third possibility is that it wound up on the dining room floor and has been crushed or tracked to some unrecoverable place. We choose to repress this third hypothesis. I spend the next 30 minutes carefully searching the dining room. No luck. The next 30 minutes is devoted to the bathroom. Again, nothing. I'm certain that the contact lens is in neither place. The third hypothesis must be true. The lens fell to the dining room floor and has gone to a permanent resting place. I have done all I can and returned to my book. My wife is desperate to find the lens, and she continues her search alone. After an hour, she again asks for my help, but we have no new leads, no clues. However, the spirit of the book I am holding steals over me. I quickly review the chronology of events and then lean back on the sofa, puffing an imaginary pipe of the sort Inspector Maigret might smoke. Then a voice disfigured by an attempted French accent tells my wife, "Go into the bedroom to the clothes hamper, retrieve the tablecloth that is folded there, carefully open up the tablecloth on the floor, and you will find your missing contact lens in the middle." I settle back into my novel. When I hear my wife's exclamation of triumph, I permit myself a thin, smug smile. This is one of my most successful cases. Actually, it is my only successful case, and I am pleased to have this opportunity to get it into print. What has happened is that the previous night, one contact lens did slip out while my wife transferred it to the case, and it landed on the tablecloth. After bringing the contact lens case to the bathroom, my wife prepared for the next day, as she usually does after a meal, by rolling up the tablecloth to trap all of the crumbs and food debris so that they would not fall on the floor. She carried the tablecloth to the hamper where it would remain until the next wash day. when it would be shaken outside. This is her routine. Then we went to sleep. Saturday morning, she brought out a fresh tablecloth, performed a number of other tasks, then went to put in her contact lenses. The inconsistencies in our beliefs were due to memory compartmentalization. My wife and I knew that Friday night's tablecloth was in the hamper. We knew that the contact lens had been removed Friday night. We searched for it on the clean tablecloth that had been put out Saturday morning. The two tablecloths were even of different colors, yellow on Friday and blue on Saturday. Yet, neither of us noticed the disconnect until the last-minute mental simulation has sorted out the two tablecloths. I am convinced that the credit should go to Inspector Maigret. He and his kind are the only ones who can be relied upon to catch inconsistencies. So we've reached the key points of the chapter. This is essentially the end of the chapter. Klein is just reminding us of what we just read and how it applies and how it's useful. Rational analysis is a sort of power with strengths and weaknesses. Hyperrationality is the attempt to apply deductive and statistical reasoning and analyses to situations where they do not apply. Hyperrationality runs into difficulty for a number of reasons. There are no basic elements, rules are ambiguous, setting up the calculations requires subjective judgments, formal analyses can degenerate into combinational explosions. Trying to conduct a formal analysis can interfere with non-rational forms of thinking. The features of natural settings usually prevent formal analysis. And lastly, consistency is rarely ensured in natural settings. That was chapter 15. That was the first visual stream that we've done with first visual reading. I hope you guys got more out of it with the overlay, with the book in front of you guys. At least you'll be able to go check it on the replay too. I'm going to upload this to the YouTube channel, just like all the other ones.